Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started in 1 minute here. All right. Welcome to OJP TFSC Learning Exchange Training Series. In today's meeting, we'll discuss successfully completing a budget detailed worksheet. And our learning objectives for today is learn to apply cost principles across different budget categories, identify common budget errors and learn tips and strategies to avoid and rectify them, and learn to access different TTA materials developed by OJP TFSC to help grantees effectively manage their grant awards.
Esto va a ser en inglés.
Before we get started, if you are experiencing any technical issues for this webinar, please let me know in the chat box. So let's go over a couple of Zoom tips. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you see a microphone icon, and this is where you can adjust your audio options, mute and unmute yourself. If you are not speaking today, please ensure you mute yourself just to avoid any background noise or any interruptions. And to the right of the microphone icon, you see a video icon. This is where you can adjust your video options, start and stop your video. And to the right of those icons, you see your chat icon. And this is where we'll communicate with everyone on the platform today. So let's type in the chat the last thing that you had for breakfast. And please keep in mind when typing in the chat box, the default setting is to message everyone. If you need to send a message privately, just select the drop down and choose your recipient. All right, and I see the answers flooding in. On the top right side of your screen, you can change your viewing experience. You can go with speaker view or you can go with gallery view. Next slide, please. Captions and Spanish interpretation is available. You can enable live captions by clicking the live transcripts show subtitle button on the bottom of your menu. Spanish interpretation is available by clicking the globe icon on the bottom of your screen and selecting Spanish. If activated, you will hear Spanish audio at 80% and English at 20%. You can turn off the English channel by selecting Mute Original Audio. Then you'll hear only the Spanish channel. Finally, it is my pleasure to introduce our instructors for today. First, we'll have Crystal McNeil Wright. Crystal is an associate CFO for the Grants Financial Management Division in the Office for Justice Programs. She brings more than 30 years of leadership and management experience in accounting and finance from both the private and public sectors. We'll also have Russ Bermejo. Russ is a senior training and technical assistance specialist for the OJP TFSC. Russ brings over 25 years of experience with projects serving children and families affected by child maltreatment and substance use disorders. Also joining us today is Angela Wade. Angela is a staff accounting and financial management trainer in the Office of Justice Programs, Office of the Chief Financial Officer. She has 30 years of accounting, finance, management, and training experience in both the private and public sectors. Angela has a business analytics professional certificate, a data analyst certification, a grants financial management certification, as well as an Oracle professional certification. Last and certainly not least, we'll have Francis Mendez. Francis is the project director for the OJP TFSC, bringing 25 years of experience in justice and victim services programs, financial management, training, and technical assistance. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Crystal McNeil Wright.
Thank you so much, Jamil. Good morning, Puerto Rico grantees and Virgin Island grantees. Thank you so much for joining us today to go over this particular webinar in reference to budget analysis and assisting you with completing your budget detail worksheet. So very excited that you can join us. Next slide, please. So today our agenda, we are going to start off with a grantee engagement. We use Mentimeter if you're familiar. And this is an opportunity to break a little bit of ice and just kind of get everyone engaged before we start our webinar. Then we will have a presentation, successfully completing a budget detail worksheet, just as it's been mentioned. And here you'll be able to get a lot of tools and information on assisting you with creating a budget that can be submitted for approval. We will also do polling activities. Of course, this is always an opportunity to kind of engage a little bit more, get some other information from you on challenges you may be experiencing. And then we'll have our next steps and resources, and then some closing remarks. So enjoy this webinar. Please hold your Q&A, and we will have an opportunity for you to be able to ask questions, and we'll provide answers and assist you where we can. I'm going to turn it over to Russ so he can start our Mentimeter engagement activity.
Yes, thank you, Crystal, and good morning, buenos dias. We'd like to start off with an activity here. So if you have your cell phone, go ahead and scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com, enter the code, and the question we have for you is, what challenges have you experienced while doing a budget review? So while I switch the screen here, take a few moments to log in there. And we would love to hear your responses to this question. And we're going to be hearing from Angela Wade from OCFO here in a moment. But your responses here would be helpful as we hear about what you've encountered, what's been your experience as it relates to working on your budget. There's the QR code. Take a few moments to join us there. And here's the question. What challenges have you experienced during a budget review? Let's take a look. Oh, that's a code there. Go ahead and mention or share your experiences. Would love to hear them. If it's easier, you can put that in the chat as well. But what challenges have you experienced during a budget review? And if at any point, as Crystal mentioned during the webinar, if you have a question, feel free to put that in the chat. I'm also going to leave this Mentimeter open. So if you want to submit an anonymous response, feel free to do that too. And then I'll pass that along to our presenters. But again, would love to hear your experiences as it relates to working on a budget. Just take another second here, and I'll check the chat also to see if there's any communication there. Yeah, thank you. Preparing a budget that meets the goal to maximize total utilization. Thank you for your response there. Thank you. Again, feel free to communicate or engage in the chat. I'm going to leave this slide open, meaning you can submit any responses there, or you can also submit it in the chat. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Angela, who will be talking to us about successfully completing a budget detail worksheet. Angela?
Thank you,
Thank
Rob.
you and welcome. Yep.
Good morning. Again, my name is Angela Wade. I am a staff accountant and financial management trainer in OCFO. Now, as already mentioned, today we're going to talk about completing your budget. So we will go through the budget categories and give you tips and pointers to assist you in completing your budget. Next slide, please. Now, before you get started, please make sure that you read through the solicitation. The solicitation has information in it that you will find vital to completing your budget. For example, the solicitation will tell you if your program has a match requirement. It will also list out some allowable costs that you may be able to charge to your particular grant program, as well as some unallowable costs. So it's very important that before you get started to read through that solicitation. Now, there are two main parts to your budget. That is the budget detail and the budget narrative. The budget detail is where you will provide your estimated cost along with any of your computations or calculations. In addition to the budget detail, you must provide a budget narrative. The budget narrative is where you would describe each category of estimated costs or expenses that you have listed in your budget detail. In short, the budget narrative should explain how your costs were estimated or calculated, the basis for those costs, and how they are relevant to your grant program. So the budget categories that you will be using to complete your budget are personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, instruction, subawards, procurement, other, and indirect. All of your costs that you're requesting for your OJP budget should fit into one of these categories. Next slide, please. So the first budget category is the personnel category. This is where you will estimate the cost for any of your staff that are working on your particular grant program. And when I say your staff, I mean those are the individuals that are employed within your organization. A lot of times you may have individuals working in your grant that aren't your direct employees. They may be contractors or you hired them through a contract. Those particular individuals will need to be charged to the procurement contracts category. So keep in mind of that. So for personnel, you will need to list out the position and title of each individual that's working on your particular grant program, the percentage of time. And when we say percentage of time, we mean how much time are they going to be spending working on your particular grant program. Then you want to show us how much they're being paid. So it's very important you include their salary or rate of pay. And also, if your organization is currently paying cost of living increases, you want to make sure that you include that in your personnel category as well. As always with any of these budget categories, all your costs should be allowable, reasonable, necessary, and allocable to your particular grant program. Next slide, please. Now, just a few pointers or tips as you're completing the personnel category. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of times you may have individuals working in your grant program that aren't direct employees of yours. So those people should be listed in the procurement contracts category. So the personnel category should only show your direct employees. Excessive annual salary limits. Now, there is a limit on the salaries that you can pay to your staff. Currently, for 2023, the limit is 110% of the SES salary, which is $212,100. So you want to be mindful of that salary limit. If for some reason you feel as though you still need to pay that excessive salary, you want to reach out to your program manager, and you may be able to request a waiver to exceeding that salary limit. Also, on page 58 of the DOJ Financial Guide, there is additional information on what the excessive salary limits are. Also, keep in mind for the personnel category as well, any time charged to the grant for your staff members should be for grant-related activities only. Next slide, please. Fringe benefits. The first thing I want to tell you about fringe benefits is you should only be paying fringe benefits for those personnel individuals or staff members that you had listed in the personnel category. So fringe benefits usually includes items such as health insurance, retirement, FICA, and workman's comp. So you should be listing that out in your fringe benefits category. What is considered unallowable in fringe benefits is paying excessive bonuses or excessive benefits for any of your executives within your organization. So when you're listing out fringe benefits, you want to list them out individually. You want to itemize them. Next slide, please. And when we talk about itemizing your fringe benefits, for example, let's say you're paying a fringe benefit rate of 35%, which is made up of those items I listed before, the health insurance, the workman's comp, retirement, et cetera. You want to list out the amount for each individual item. So if you have for example, have a 35% fringe benefit rate, you want to list out how much of that percentage refers to retirement, how much refers to health insurance, how much refers to FICA, for example. You also want to make sure when you're calculating out your fringe benefits that you're using the amount of salary that you're charging in the personnel category. Again, it's very important with fringe benefits that you itemize them out. This is one of the many reasons why we may return your budget back to you, because we don't know what makes up your fringe benefits. Next slide, please. Is the travel category. So for travel, one of the first things you need to know before you complete the travel category is you need to make sure you know your organization's policy for travel. If you do not have your own policy, then you must follow the federal government's travel policy. So it's very important you let us know what travel policy you are following. Otherwise, we're going to assume that you're following the federal travel policy when you're estimating your cost for travel. So for travel, we want to see how many people are traveling. We want to know why you're traveling, and a lot of times your particular grant program or your program office will have mandated travel. So that might be your purpose right there. You want to let us know your per diem rates. Again, if you're following your organization's policy or if you're following the federal government's policy. And then each line item of travel, you want to list out separately. So you want to show a separate line item for your transportation, such as airfare or train travel, bus, taxi. You want to list out a line item for your lodging. Your lodging should include your lodging rate as well as any lodging taxes or fees. You want to list a line item out for your per diem, that is your meals that are being paid for with travel. Any of your local travel, you want to list those out separately, parking, tolls, etc. And for local travel, you also want to make sure that you tell us what local travel policy you are following, whether it's yours or the federal government's. One thing you want to be mindful of, if you do have air travel, you want to make sure that you include any baggage fees that are being charged as well. Next slide, please. Anytime there is a conference or event that's being paid for by the Office of Justice Programs, and there are 30 or more participants, they could be federal or non-federal. Anytime you have that type of event, any lodging costs that are needed for any of the attendees must not exceed the federal per diem rate. So basically, anytime you have an OJP-sponsored event that has 30 or more attendees or participants, then you must follow the federal per diem rate for lodging. If you have an event or conference with less than 30 people, you do not have to follow that policy. Next slide, please. So again, with travel, all your travel costs should be broken down and listed out. A lot of times we'll receive budgets and we'll send them back because we see it just a lump sum, somebody's traveling and they put down the amount of $5,000. Please break that amount out. If you have a conference and you have registration fees associated with that, you want to make sure that goes to the other category. Additionally, when it comes to travel, I mentioned you should make sure you know your travel policy for your organization. You also want to make sure that policy is up to date and relevant. So you do not want to use a travel policy that has not been updated within the last 10, 15 years. You always want to make sure that you're using that updated travel policy. Also, if your lodging rate within your organization's policy ends up being more than what the GSA rate is, we do require you to provide a justification and let us know, again, the travel policy that you are using. Next slide, please.
All right. This is where we take a little break from the presentation and want to hear about your experiences. So we're going to conduct a poll. My colleague, Jamil, will launch the poll here in a moment, but we want to hear your experiences along these specific categories that you just heard from Angela. So for the first polling question, we want to hear what have been your challenges in terms of personnel. And you can check all that apply. Have you experienced salaries of direct employees not in personal category? If you encounter the challenge of non-employees' salaries not in procurement contracts or excessive annual salary, go ahead and take a few moments. Thank you for your responses here. If you select other, we would love to hear those. You can insert that in the chat. Thank you for your responses. Looks like a few of you have encountered salaries of direct employees not in personnel category. And also excessive annual salary limits require a signed waiver. We'll do a couple more of these, but thank you for your responses. And Jamil, I assume that they'll be able to see the results.
Yes, I shared the results.
Awesome. All right. Let's go to polling question number 2. And we want to hear your experiences regarding fringe benefits. So if you've encountered any of these challenges, go ahead and select your response and vote. And again, if none of them are captured here and you want to press other, go ahead and do that and enter that in the chat. What have been your challenges in terms of fringe benefits? And the answers are coming in. Looks like a few of you have experienced actually each of these. So good, with the most frequently mentioned fringe benefits base different from calculated salaries in personnel category. Thank you again. And let's do one more. We're going to do travel. What have been your challenges or experiences regarding travel? If you experience any of these, go ahead and select all that apply. And if you press other, go ahead and put that in the chat. Looks like everyone's experienced at least one or two of these. The most common registration conference fees not allocated to other cost categories and lodging rate. All right, so we're going to resume back to the presentation with Angela, and then we'll do another set of these here in a few minutes. With that, I want to turn this over to Angela. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Russ. So for the equipment category, before you start budgeting in equipment, you need to know what your organization's policy is for capitalizing equipment. And as always, if you don't have your own policy, you must follow the federal policy. So for equipment, you want to list out the equipment that you're purchasing by unit, or the cost, and how this equipment is going to support your particular grant program. So again, you should be following your own organization's policy for capitalizing equipment. Next slide, please. So under the federal policy for capitalizing equipment, it's a useful life of more than 1 year with a fair market value of $5,000 or more. Now, if you have purchased equipment using your grant funds under the federal policy, If your grant program comes to an end and you no longer need that equipment and the fair market value is less than $5,000, the federal government will actually let you keep that equipment with no further obligation back to them. If at the disposition time, the fair market value of the equipment is $5,000 or more, you could either keep the equipment or sell it. However, if you do sell that equipment, any proceeds from the sale must be returned to the federal awarding agency. Next slide, please. So for equipment, it's very important that you list out only the items that belong in the equipment category following your organization's policy for capitalizing equipment. A lot of times you may have items in the equipment category and maybe they fall under your threshold for capitalizing equipment and they should have went in supplies. That's kind of going to make your calculation for your indirect costs not come out correctly. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, if you're charging indirect costs for your program and you're using a modified total direct cost as your basis, it's very important that when you're budgeting any of these categories that you have everything in the right category. Otherwise, it's going to affect that computation. A lot of times we end up sending budgets back because we see that some items are in the equipment category when they should have been put in the supplies category, throwing that computation or calculation off. Again, for item number 2 on this list, it is very important that you do know your organization's policy for capitalizing equipment. If an item of equipment, or let's say you purchase a laptop and is less than your threshold for capitalizing equipment, then that item would then go under in the supplies category. So any item of equipment that falls underneath your threshold for capitalization would then go into supplies. Next slide, please. So the supplies category. The supplies category has those items of equipment that, again, fell underneath the threshold for capitalizing equipment. It also includes your office supplies, if you're hosting a conference, any supplies you may need for that conference. It may include items, charges for postage. Again, you want to itemize that information out. And you also, in the narrative, let us know how these supplies are going to actually help support your grant program. What benefit does it provide? Next slide, please. So again, everything in supplies should be itemized out. If you list out something as a miscellaneous expense in supplies or any of the other budget categories, if we're reviewing your budget, we're not going to know what miscellaneous expense means. So you need to itemize that out as well. Next slide, please. Construction. Now, generally for our OJP grants, construction costs are not allowable. However, we do have some programs that will allow construction costs, and generally they wouldn't be construction costs when it's allowed. They're usually costs for renovations or repairs. So anytime you have a grant program that may allow construction costs or renovation costs, you want to make sure you reach out to your program office. They will be able to provide you guidelines on how to budget for this particular category. Next slide, please. Subawards. Now, it may be times with your particular grant programs that you're actually passing money down to as a subaward or to a sub-recipient. So whenever you have a subaward included in your grant, you want to provide a description of the federal award activities that this particular sub-recipient or subaward is covering, how much or the estimated cost for this particular subaward. And if you have the sub-recipient name, you might want to include that as well. So it's very important that you list out each subaward, how to support your particular grant program and the cost that goes along with it. Next slide, please. Now, some tips or pointers when you get to the subaward category. A lot of times we'll receive budgets and we'll have subawards that are listed under procurement contracts, or we'll have contracts with consultants listed under subawards. It's very important that you separate them out appropriately. Any contracts with consultants that are not sub-recipients should go under the procurement contract category. Sometimes this happens because in previous years, the subaward and procurement contracts budget category was grouped together. So now they're two separate budget categories. You need to separate out those contracts and consultants that are not subawards and put them in the procurement contracts category. You also want to make sure that when you're calculating out your indirect costs for the indirect cost category, if you have subawards, you're only including the first $25,000 for the entire cost of that subaward. So if you have a subaward for, say, $75,000, and they're going to be working in your grant program for a year, the total you need to calculate it on is the first $25,000, not for each year, it's for the entire amount. Apologize. And again, list out each subaward separately and the total cost, and make sure you are calculating out correctly when you're applying indirect cost to that. Next slide, please. The procurement category. So the procurement categories for any of your contracts or the consultants that you are using for your particular grant. So for procurement, you want to provide a description of the product or service that's being procured or contracted with. And you also want to make sure you include the cost of that particular contract. So for example, if you're using an individual consultant, the threshold for using a consultant is $650 for an 8-hour day. You're not supposed to exceed that cost. However, the key thing is with consultants, you're supposed to be paying them what they're worth. So if you have a consultant and their rate exceeds the $650 for an 8-hour day, then you will need to get prior approval from your program office before exceeding that $650 for an 8-hour day threshold. If under your procurement, you're using a sole source and your sole source is over $250,000, then you will need to get a prior approval and provide a justification for utilizing that sole source. Anytime you're getting a prior approval for that consultant rate or that sole source, that's a separate approval outside of your budget. So just because your budget gets approved does not mean you've been approved to use that, exceeding that consultant rate or using that sole source for over $250,000. So for each one of these things in procurement, you want to list out the service they're providing, the rate or fee, and how it's going to support your particular grant program. Next slide, please. So again, for procurement, you want to completely describe the service that's being provided. You want to, again, include the cost, label it if you want to let us know if it's a contract or a consultant, or again, if you're using a sole source. Next slide, please. The next category is the other category. So for the other category, this is where you put your budget items that basically don't really fit in the other any of the other categories we went through. So in the other category, what we usually are looking for here is if you're charging utilities to your particular grant program, rent, et cetera. Again, the conference registration fees that I mentioned out, you need to provide the basis. Like for example, for utilities, your basis may be the square footage of the space you're using. It may be a flat monthly amount. So you want to make sure you provide the basis that you're using to charge that. You also want to itemize each one out that you're entering in the other category. So itemize it out, provide the basis and the type of item that you're including in the other category. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you, Angela. And we have a few more polling questions. So we want to hear about your experiences, your challenges regarding equipment. So go ahead, take a few moments to respond to any of these items that you've encountered regarding equipment. And again, if you press other, go ahead and put that in the chat. The responses are coming in. It looks like a few of you have experienced each of these, and we have actually an other. So if you selected other, if you feel free to enter that particular challenge in the chat. Thank you. Thank you. And again, if you have any questions regarding the presentation and you want to pose a question to Angela or OCFO or even TFC, go ahead and put that in the chat. We're going to have a Q&A towards the end of our session. All right, let's go to our next polling question. Subawards. What have you encountered regarding subawards? Again, take a few moments here. You experienced inclusion of contracts or consultants not considered as subaward? Or what about miscalculation of the de minimis rate because they apply to 25,000 per year for the subaward instead of just the first 25,000 of the subaward? Feel free to select any of these that apply. Looks like you've experienced both of these, so thank you. All right, thank you for your responses there. And I think we have one more. Let's do procurement. What are your experiences regarding procurement? Have you experienced any of these? No description for product or services provided, or whether you're not sure if it's a subaward. So feel free to enter that. And if you pressed other, thank you for that. Go ahead and put that in the chat. All right. So it looks like you've experienced these as well. I think we have one more polling question here in a minute. But with that, I want to turn this back over to Angela, who's going to talk about indirect cost.
Thank you, Russ. So our next category is indirect cost. If you are charging indirect costs with your particular award, you should have an approved indirect cost rate agreement, a current approved indirect cost rate agreement, that is, from your federal cognizant agency. Your federal cognizant agency is usually the federal agency that provides the majority of your federal funding. So they're usually responsible for negotiating your indirect cost rate agreement. So if you have a current indirect cost rate agreement, you're going to actually attach that and just grants when you submit your budget. And again, when you're completing your budget, you need to include the actual rate. So you should be using the rate that's on your indirect cost rate agreement. You're going to let us know the type of rate and the basis for your rate. If you don't have an approved indirect cost rate agreement, you may elect to use the de minimis rate. If you are using the de minimis rate, you need to indicate that in your application when you're submitting it, and also indicate the percentage that you are using with that. You are able to use up to 10% of modified total direct cost if you are utilizing the de minimis rate. Next slide, please. So again, with the indirect cost, you need to make sure that you are using the rate that's in your current indirect cost rate agreement and that it is attached when you submit your budget. And when you're calculating out your indirect cost should be based on only the federal share of your award. So you should not be using any match or non-federal share to calculate indirect cost. If you are charging indirect cost, and you do not have a current rate, you need to let us know that you're waiting for an approved rate. And what will happen is when we approve that your budget, we will put the amount you have charged in indirect costs on hold until you provide a current indirect cost rate agreement. Next slide, please.
All right, this is our last polling question, and we know that indirect costs can be a challenge. We want to hear about what you've encountered. So let's launch our last poll for today. Which of these have you encountered? And again, if you feel free to press other if we didn't capture any of those here, you can put that in the chat. What challenges have you experienced regarding indirect cost? And the responses are coming in. Again, we have another, someone pressed other, so would love to hear that in the chat if you're able to put that in. It looks like you've experienced each one of these. The most common or frequently mentioned was indirect cost-based calculations incorrectly applied. So again, thank you for participating in this. We're in the home stretch here, and Angela is going to talk about matching. Thank you, everyone.
So let's talk a little bit about match. A lot of times your particular award may have a match requirement. So there are a couple of things I want you to be mindful of when we're looking at match. If there's something that's unallowable with federal funds, then guess what? It's going to be unallowable with match funds. You also want to make sure that you have, again, read through the solicitation so you can see what the match requirement is. Generally, the match requirement is based on, the match amount is based on a percentage. There is a page in the DOJ Financial Guide, page 26, that has a table that will help you out in calculating out your match. So you want to make sure you calculate that out correctly. And when you're completing your budget, you want to make sure that you have included the required match in that budget. Otherwise, we will send that back. Also, match is reported on your federal financial reports. You need to make sure you reporting your match out on there. And be mindful, DOJ does not dictate dates and when you need to meet your match requirement, but you do need to meet that match requirement by the time your award program ends. So keep that in mind. Also with match, again, you want to make sure that you have included that within your budget and you're reporting it out correctly. Also, a lot of times you may not have a match requirement and you'll complete your budget and you'll include match. We will ask you, are you sure you want to include that? Because if you include match when you're not required and your budget gets approved, guess what? You now have a match requirement and you have to keep records on that and may be audited. So a lot of times if you include match when you're not required, we'll ask you, are you sure you want to include that? Do you want to remove it? So be mindful of including match when it's not required. Next slide, please. So right here we have some errors that come up in regards to match. And if you go down this list, you'll see that a lot of these common errors in regards to match is based on the calculation. So it's very important that you actually read this, do the solicitation so you know what your match requirement is. And again, page 26 of the DOJ Financial Guide has a table that will teach you how to actually accurately calculate out your match requirement. A lot of times you come to the end of the award and we find out it's time to close out, and guess what? You didn't meet your match requirement. You're going to owe money back to the federal government. So you want to make sure that you are meeting that match requirement as you're working through your grant program and that you have actually included it in your budget and identified the source of your particular match. Also, again, a lot of times we'll look at your budget and the amount of match you have listed in your budget narrative does not match the amount of match you have listed in your budget details. So you always want to make sure whatever you have in your budget detail is what you have stated down in your budget narrative. I've already mentioned in the indirect cost category that you cannot calculate your match based off of indirect costs. So all indirect costs would be coming from be charged against the federal award amount, not any of your match requirements. Next slide, please. So what we have here is some of the errors we usually find or we come across when we're actually reviewing your budget. And our goal is to let you know on some of these errors right now, so then when you're working on your budget, you can be mindful of what you're including or you're missing when you're completing your budget. So the first one, federal award amount budget does not match the approved federal award amount. So you want to make sure when you're entering your budget that the total amount of your budget does equal the total amount you're being awarded for this particular program. Web-based budget is missing info on required fields or fields are left blank. This actually applies to just grants. So when you're entering that web-based budget and just grants, you want to make sure that you have not forgotten anything. Everything that you're required to submit is filled out, and nothing is left blank. A lot of times, what I usually recommend to our grantees is that when you're completing your budget, before you actually submit it, have someone in your office, someone else in your office come and take a look at it, read through it, see if it makes sense to them. If it makes sense to them, 9 times out of 10, you probably have enough information in there to fully explain what you're requesting in your budget. We just talked about match. Make sure that you have read through the solicitation and you're including the correct match requirement within your budget. Unallowable costs are included. So I mentioned allowable and unallowable costs at the beginning. Your solicitation will list out some allowable costs as well as some unallowable costs for your particular program. Also, there's a section in the DOJ financial guide that talks about a lot of the unallowable costs, as well as the 2 CFR 200 circular. So there's a lot of resources you can look at to verify whether or not costs you're including may be considered unallowable. You always want to make sure that you itemize everything out in your budget. You may know what you're requesting in your mind, but if we're reading it, we might not necessarily know what you're trying to request. So you need to basically explain it to us what you're actually requesting in your budget and break it out so we can understand what you are requesting. I mentioned the budget narrative. Budget narrative is required for each budget category that you are requesting funding. So you want to make sure you include that narrative and that it concisely and clearly explains all the items you have listed in your budget detail or your budget calculations. If you're charging it indirect costs again, you want to make sure you have included a current copy of your approved indirect cost rate agreement or clearly state that you are electing to use the de minimis rate. And finally, responses to initial budget reviews inquiries were insufficient. If we review your budget and we send it back to you for additional information or questions, please make sure you read through them and respond to them. If for some reason you're not quite sure what information we're looking for, please reach out to your OJP grant manager and they will be able to assist you. So the goal is to get your budgets reviewed and approved so that you can begin working on your particular grant program. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Angela. So now we're going to go into the Q&A. So if anybody has any questions about the information presented, you can unmute and ask your question, or you can type it in the chat. If folks want to share any best practices that they use in making sure that all the budget information is entered into Just Grants, or how they track matching costs throughout the grant, feel free to indicate any best practices that you use. While we're waiting for folks to see if they have any questions, what are, this is directed at OCFO, what are some of the unallowable costs that you've seen included in budgets during the budget review? If you could give an example. Anybody from OCFO, feel free.
Yes, I have one example. A lot of times in the travel category, we may see where the grantee is including travel for airfare, and they're adding an extra charge for maybe boarding the airplane early, when that may be considered unreasonable and unallowable.
Got it. So it's so equivalent to like an upgrade, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Yes. Okay. So that's very helpful and useful. So that type of cost would be unallowable, would be considered an upgrade if you're paying for to board early or to have a better seat.
And recently, we've been seeing more food and beverages placed in there, and most of the time, food and beverages are unallowable. There are some rare instances where it is allowable, but generally, food and beverage is unallowable also in that category.
Okay, that's very helpful as well. So generally not allowable. And if you think there's a rare exception, would it be you have to get pre-approval from your program manager first, but generally it's not allowable. Okay, so we have a question. If you have pay accounts, the budgets and finance grant, that is okay to works. Elvis, ¿puede decir tu pregunta en español? No pude entender la pregunta. Puede ponerlo en español en el chat o puede decirlo, unmute tu teléfono. All right, we have a question here from Elvis. Okay, here we go. So Elvis, si puede decir tu pregunta más clara, lo puede poner en español, decirlo. So we're waiting to see if Elvis can clarify his question. We have another comment that came up where Christine is sharing she's seen good results where grantees think ahead by matching up budget line items with internal GL codes for supplies and other costs. So this really helps when doing the budget to actuals for budget revision scans later down the line. So when they pull the GL to put in the actuals, then they can create line items and sort the GL codes. Okay, so here's a suggestion for folks on the line. Anybody else have questions? And Elvis, you can always email us the question and we can try to get you the answer. Okay, so I'm going to turn it to Jamil. That's going to take us to next steps. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Francis. So let's review some final takeaways from today's session. Here at OJP TFSC, we provide training, technical assistance, and resources to enhance financial management capacity for grantees in the U.S. territories to improve financial management of federal awards. And I'll share some resources in the chat for you, just to make it easier. There we go. Next slide, please. For the topic we explored today, you can download the TTA resource, Creating a Program Budget Guide Sheet, in the chat box. And we also have a Spanish version that I'll put in the chat box right now. Next slide, please. Here at OJP TFSC, we offer the Virtual Support Center to answer any questions you may have about grant financial management. So, anytime during or after this series, if you or your team need any type of additional training or technical assistance, please let Zarel or Nicole know, or you can email us at ojptfsc@usdoj.gov. We make sure to get back with you within 24 hours of the next business day. And we're proud to partner with OCFO in supporting grantees. So if you have any questions for OCFO, you can email their customer support center at ask.ocfo@usdoj.gov. And also those email addresses and listserv links are in the chat for you as well. On behalf of the OJP TFSC Financial Support TTA team, we want to thank you for joining us today. Please reach out to us if we can be of any support. I would like to thank the presenters and the attendees for a great session. We hope you enjoyed all the content today. Have a great day. You may now disconnect.